You probably heard about the race to the bottom. Well, it's a real thing, and on this installment of the Offset Podcast, we're going to talk about how to fight it. Stay tuned.
This podcast is sponsored by Flanders Scientific, leaders in color-accurate display solutions for professional video. Whether you're a colorist, an editor, a DIT, or a broadcast engineer, Flanders Scientific has a professional display solution to meet your needs. Learn more at flandersscientific.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another installment of the Offset Podcast. I'm Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Joey Deanna.
And Joey, today I want to talk about something that has been bothering me. It's been bothering our industry. We talk about it all the time with our peers and our friends on, online groups and in person. And that is the old race to the bottom. To be clear, the race to the bottom is not something that is only affecting the post-production industry and what we do. The race to the bottom is, whatever. It's always a fight that people are fighting. But I think we should kind of begin this conversation kind of defining what we mean by the race to the bottom, because I think it can mean something slightly different to different people, but I'll give you what my understanding or my feeling about the race to the bottom is, and that is that anytime an industry tends to democratize itself and more people are involved in that industry, right, the pie gets bigger, right, and more people, more operators are wanting to slice of that pie. What tends to happen is that less people are working consistently, and one way to get more work consistently is by doing it cheaper than the person who is also doing that same work, right? And so, the days of, the early days of this, in our industry in color were when, somebody was doing $1,500 an hour or whatever, $2,000 an hour for a show or for, a grade. And somebody came around and be like, well, I can do it for $900 an hour or $800 an hour. And now we have the race to the bottom part about this means that snowballs, right? Is that people are adding more and more services. Sometimes they're adding services that are dramatically lower than market rate. They're dramatically lower than anybody is offering in different markets even. And sometimes they're even just tossing things in for free to build volume and to build that work. We have seen this universally in post-production. We've seen it universally in production. Budgets are smaller, less value is applied. And nowadays, even people are like, well, we can just get AI to do that. It doesn't matter. And we don't have to pay you, right? Like that's all a contributing factor to the race to the bottom. And I have no illusions of grandeur. I alone, you alone can't completely fight back on the race to the bottom. It's a little bit out of our control to a certain degree. But in this episode, I think I want to talk a little bit about, I do want to talk about things that I think we can do as colorists, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, whatever, to kind of fight this. But first, before we begin, is that more or less line up with kind of your feeling about the race to the bottom and kind of the definition of it?
Yeah. There's a couple things going on with it that I think are really relevant today. And that is, as things have been democratized, like you said, we've gone from very expensive tools to very inexpensive tools. And I remember when $1,000 Final Cut Pro came out.
Yeah.
Post houses were like, this is going to put us out of business.
Yep.
It's not what ended up putting the post house out of business.
Nope.
What's important to remember is there is going to be opportunity in high quality creative work and creative talent, no matter what the tools involved to do that are. As the tools dramatically change, I think where we can protect ourselves is by staying competent artists, right? You want to sell the artist, not the paintbrush. And we've seen huge changes in the cost of the paintbrush, right? And we can no longer charge in our hourly rates for the cost of the paintbrush, not nearly as much anyway. So we need to focus it in on us as the artists to kind of make sure we don't end up completely broke at the end of the day.
I mean, it's really well said, and it's something that I think a lot about when I look at a lot of the marketing of post-production companies where they put capabilities in, they frame capabilities in terms of equipment, right? We have this HDR monitor, we have this control surface, we have these GPUs, And half the time I just want to say, like, who cares? That stuff changes every single day.
It used to matter, right? You needed to deliver digibeta, you needed a place with a digibeta suite.
Right.
The world is a different place now.
Yeah, and I think, but in general, I think that is part of, you know, in the general context, in the overall 50,000-foot view of this conversation, not losing perspective that the artistry and the personnel matters more than the stuff is one way to fight that. And I think that is, you know, really well done by some of the biggest companies in our industry, right? If you go to, I'm just using Company 3 because they're probably the biggest, right? If you look at Company 3's website, right, there is no mention of what they grade on. There is no mention of what they have in their machine room. There's no mention of how fast their internet is or what they use for their upload service.
I bet you a lot of money that their base hourly rate for most artists did not change when DaVinci Resolve went from $500,000 to $100,000 to $1,000 to $300.
They're charging people because, oh, it's Stefan Sonnenfeld, it's Dave Hussey, it's Steven Nakamura, right? These people who have 30, 40 years of experience, who have worked on the biggest productions, who have seen it, literally seen it all, know how to handle it all, have dealt with, you know, clients from, you know, perfectly nice, happy people to the worst of the worst in terms of attitude. That's why one of the things that they're doing. And I just think that, again, 50,000-foot view, don't lose perspective about that at all in the race to the bottom, is that once we start valuing stuff more than we start valuing people, you're going to be participating in the race to the bottom, right? Yeah. And I think that's a danger, is that I always want to put myself, you, other people we work with first rather than the equipment. But I think part of this, like the real meat and potatoes of this discussion, is rates, right? Yeah. You know, it used to be, as I mentioned earlier, you know, $1,000, $1,500 an hour was not even all that uncommon, even in medium-sized facilities. You know, now we see people, I mean, I had a client the other day straight up tell me that, like, well, we're going to this other place because they're charging us XYZ. And I was like, I can't even begin to think about how I could support my company, pay myself, you know, pay Joey, whatever it may be, charging that hourly rate. Like, I would have to do 500 of those type of projects every year to even break even, right? And I think it's a hard thing to find your rate. And I think there's three kind of ways to do this, because I think finding your rate and sticking to it is the primary method that we have to kind of fight that race to the bottom, right? So number one, I think rates should be there. I think there's three ways of looking at this. Number one is the psychology factor of rates, right? If you feel like your skills and your experience are enough to compete at the highest level, pick a number out of a hat and stick to it, right? Like, I think what you make your rate says a lot about what value you bring to a production from a psychological level, right? I don't think there's really anything tangibly different from, you know, one place that charges $300 an hour and a place that charges $800 an hour, other than the fact that the $800 an hour place just had the proverbial cojones to say it's $800 an hour or whatever, right? And I think that the kind of psychological perceptual part about rate setting also really plays into clients. That, like, a client goes, well, these guys must be better. They're charging $800 an hour versus, you know, $200 an hour, right? And I think not everybody that plays in, but to a lot of people that plays, right? Two, I think the market rate is important. And I think, you know, we talk a lot to friends about this, about like, hey, what are you charging? Like, it's not to undercut them. It's, to a certain degree, you owe it to your market to discuss what other people are doing and try to more or less, you're not going to, you know, yell at somebody for, oh, you charge, you know, $50 under what I would have charged, but to generally have an idea of, guys, to keep this market intact where we're all doing something then better for all, we need to hold this rate. So market rate is an important one. And then third one is that ROI kind of rate setting, right? What is it going to really cost you to service your debts, make some money, pay yourself, all those kind of stuff, and figure out what your rate should be from there. I don't know. I mean, I think that, to me, figuring out that number is important. And it's not so much the number, It's the more about sticking to that number and presenting that number. And Joey, I don't mean to throw you under the bus here and put you in an awkward space, but we talk about this a lot, right?
I'm awful at it.
Well, we talk about it in the sense of like the nervousness about presenting numbers to people.
Yes.
But what I see contributing to the race to the bottom is people who are like yourself, nervous to have these discussions and fearful that there is some sort of value judgment as you as a person, operator, etc., if you put out a number that might be perceived as high, right?
Yes. I will admit, a weird anxiety about talking about rates with clients, and it's been a struggle over many years because I'm always scared to ask for the higher rate. I'm always worried that they're going to just say no, we're never working with you again. I worry that this job, the most recent job, is always going to be the last job, right? Because that's always a possibility, right? So I would just add this to the entire rate discussion. You do need to have some consciousness of what your clients are willing to pay, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because
of course.
If you just say, I'm going to make my rate this much, even if you really do believe you're that valuable, if you're in a market where clients just aren't ever going to pay that, you'll make zero.
right,
Yeah.
but
You don't want to be at such a low rate that you're undercutting, like you said, that market rate.
No, I agree with that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, there's nothing like I have never in 25 years, I've never experienced the situation that you worry about, right? I've never experienced this situation where I say to somebody, this is how much it costs for us. And they go, well, we're never working with you again. Now, it's true. They might not work with us on that project, but the idea of being totally, blackballed or whatever because of your value, I actually find it to be the opposite. I actually find it when you say and you hold that line to people, it's like, oh man, well, one day I wish I could afford those guys to do that work. Like holding to a rate actually sets up a wall of like perceived value to the client. Like they value their time and effort and their experience so much that they're not going to come down to what we want to pay because they're holding that line. Now, I agree that if you hold that line into perpetuity and you're not working, like not working is not a good thing either. But I would also make the argument that the clients that tend to balk at rate are also tend to be the clients that give
They're
you
always
the
the
most
worst.
difficulty in the process in general, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I have always found that clients that are like, cool, that sounds great. And again, that's not saying that we might not work something out here or finagle a little bit, but they don't have this visceral, like, how dare you charge me that much? Like, they're like, cool, that's your rate. Like, let me see what I can do with my budget and come up with it. Those clients, great, easy. They respect your work, whatever. The clients that I find that are trying to force you to the race to the bottom and discount this and discount that, you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile, right? And they're also going to be those kind of clients and those kind of projects that you end up resenting a little bit, that you're like, God, why did I say yes to this? I'm not making any money on this. And like you're stabbing yourself in the foot. So I just say, whatever methodology you find to stick to that rate, I think is fine, but just stick to it. Now, related to this is I think this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we had this discussion. And it was at the time where it was kind of like we were using 1 or 2 rates kind of as like a catch-all for everything, right? I think another way to kind of combat the sticker shock sometimes, or the idea of, this race to the bottom, is to diversify your services as line items and what the costs of those are, right? So let's say you have a client that comes in and goes, well, I need to grade this spot. And you go, well, cool. It's going to be 4 hours to grade this spot. And they balk and they go, well, I really only have 3 hours or 2 hours of time to grade the spot at your grading rate. Cool. Well, here's 2 hours of grading rate. Here's my hour of conform. Here's my hour of packaging and deliverables or whatever. However you want to frame it, to get back up to the bottom line number that you weren't, has a surprising psychological effect for clients, because they go, oh, okay, I get it. Like, this is that, you're doing this. And for whatever reason, it's not just one big catch-all number, I think has paid a lot of dividends for us. And I think clients are more apropos to understand that the more that you can break down. Now, the danger with that, of course, is you don't want to line item people to death. Somebody shared a quote with me the other day that I just thought was like literally one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. And it was not even a gigabyte, it was a per megabyte charge for downloading files, right? Like, I get it. Digital deliveries, you can spend a lot of time bringing files down and up or whatever. Some people charge for it, some people don't. That's not what I'm talking about. But nickel and diming people to the sense that their invoice is going to have 47 items, I don't suggest.
Any of these things is a balance to strike, right? You want to have enough detail for the client to understand this is where my money's going, this is why it's adding up to this total. But yeah, we have seen some invoices and some bids from some facilities where it's like the sweet vacuuming fee and like,
I mean, who knows? Those people might be geniuses, and we might just be doing it wrong the entire time. But I think that nickel and diming and that line iteming people to death is a balance act, because it can have the opposite effect and contribute actually to the race to the bottom, because somebody goes, well, I'm just going to go to the guy that doesn't nickel and dime me to death and do that. So it is a fine line about that. But I guess my point about it is that sometimes there are other ways to think about diversification of your services that don't add up to necessarily the one big ticket item, right? Like, oh, well, you're spending 15 hours at $500 an hour. It's a lot better to go, well, we're spending 5 hours at $500 an hour, but we're spending 7 hours at, whatever, $150 or $200 an hour.
Specificity and detail is good. Pedanticness and pedantry is not good.
Absolutely. And I think, the related to that and the rate thing and the line items and stuff like that is, honestly, I just full transparency, I've been guilty of this from time to time, just in the desire to get work, is the application of discounting, I think, is a really big problem in our industry. And what I mean by that is that you go to a lot of these large facilities and they have, pick a number out of there. Let's just say it's $1,000 an hour rate for coloring or something, right? But there's a difference between the advertised rate card rate and then the functional rate of like discounting. And I think that our industry has kind of come to expect discount on services no matter what, right? It's like, okay, you can charge $1,000 an hour, but really the functional rate comes down to $500 an hour after you're done with all the discounts or whatever. And I think that's another way of fighting this race to the bottom, is by being very careful and very selective about how you apply and use discounts. So great, case in point, you have a 5-minute, corporate promo to do. It's a one-off, corporate promo. In my head, I'm not discounting that. I'm charging you the time that it takes to do that work, because this is a one-off thing. There's no volume involved. And honestly, this is what I'm worth, and this is what it's going to take. Conversely, hey, we have a 13-part series, and we're going to give you guys all of the work, all of the packaging work, all of that kind of stuff. Can you cut us a little deal for giving you, committing to all of that work? Sure. That's a different use case in applying discount. I might give you an overall series discount or something like that for, the commitment of that work, but I'm not going to do it for, if you're going to like, well, we'll bring you one episode and see how it goes. No. Like, you're not getting a discount from that. And I think the other part about discounts to me is that there are certain things that are easier to discount than others, right? So like, you and I can be a little more flexible on our discounting because it's our time as partners in the business. We hire a freelancer or whatever to do, to fill in some work. Like, I can't just automatically assume that the freelancer is going to be cool with discounting, right? Or if I have hard costs, like I have to buy stuff, let's say a cruise sled and SSD or whatever for a DCP, right? Like, I can't discount that. I can't lose money on hard cost items that we're going to buy, right? So some of these things are easier to discount than others. And I would say in general, when I think about discounting, I try to discount not on rate, but try to become more efficient on time, right? because if I'm charging somebody $500 an hour, like I don't want that 500 number to move. What I can flex a little bit is, yeah, okay, well, I've thought about it. We can just we don't have to do XYZ to the shot. We can forgo that part of it and just get it done and be doing it. I'd rather discount a little bit on time versus dollar amount, because the second I start discounting a dollar amount, I feel like or rate rather, I'm running to the bottom.
Yeah, and a lot of times when talking to the client, that goes a long way to be like, we'll say, I'll keep it to X number of hours, right? We'll limit this to X number of hours. That doesn't mean we're going to have you sit here with the stopwatch,
Right.
but it does mean that they have a fixed cost in their mind for the project now. They're not like, well, how many hours is this going to take at this rate? So I think that helps when again, specificity helps when you're talking to the clients about these things.
Yeah, and related to that, I think the only way that you can get a better feel for what you just said, you're right, we do that all the time. We say, hey, we'll limit this to 5 hours because we feel confident that within that 5 hours at our regular rate, we can get this done. Even it might mean we have to hustle a little bit, but like it's not something so out of bounds that we're like, we're going to be losing money to do this. But related to that is we have the experience, and I think one thing that can help people fight this race to the bottom is being as knowledgeable and as accurate as possible on their estimates about what something really will actually take. And I see so many people going, well, I thought it was going to take 5 hours and it took 15 hours. And it's like, I want to say to them, how could you possibly let that happen to you? Right? Like, so the number one, they point out, like, well, the show wasn't what I expected. Like there was a lot more situations. Your fault.
Always
You should have
watched the
You should have
show.
watched the show, gotten a sample from it, talked through the client what the needs were, whatever. That's your fault. Never should happen, right? Two, they say things like, well, I just wanted to go the extra mile and do this, right? And so now it took me a lot longer. Yeah, I get it. I feel that compulsive need sometimes too. But as we say a lot, not everything is art. And if somebody's already fighting you on budget, time, etc., fight that feeling to be, the actual, like, you always want to do your best, of course. I'm not arguing that. But I'm saying, like, I'm not going to get up and start working on a show at 7 a.m. and work until 2 a.m. if a client's battling me on fees, right?
Yeah.
My time is money. And then third about that is you never want to be in a position where you're trying to have to come back and upcharge for money, right? Like it's a really bad thing that is going to force somebody to go to somebody who's cheaper, easier to deal with, etc. Like even if your initial estimate is high and you come back at the end and go, listen, we actually didn't end up using these 4 hours. I'm happy to take that off the final bill. You look like the hero, right? Versus coming back and going, well, I actually need more money for this because I misestimated how long it was going to take, right? Like that is a recipe for disaster, and it's going to force somebody to go somebody who might be cheaper, faster, or whatever, right? I don't know. I just think that accuracy of hours and estimating comes through experience, but is a big part. The race to the bottom, like those people who are charging $25 an hour to do something, they have no idea how long it takes, right? Because they're just like, oh, well, I'll do it for $25 an hour. The other thing I think is really, how should I say this? Pandemic, epidemic. I'm still not sure of those words after all these years.
Endemic.
Endemic is the idea of working for free. Okay.
Yeah.
We recorded an episode earlier today about new colorists and things that they should know. We should have put this into that episode too, because working for free should never be done. People should never expect it. If somebody's asking you to work for free, give them the giant middle finger, because they don't value you as an artist. They don't value you as a business owner. They don't respect you flat out, right? Now, I want to be clear about something. There's different levels of free, right?
Yeah.
If somebody just says the dreaded E word, right? You know what word I'm talking about? Exposure, right?
Oh yeah, run.
That is the run for the hills. There's no such thing as exposure for most of the time, right? And so many sob stories of people doing hundreds of hours of work for exposure. For exposure is a manipulation technique that should be excommunicated from your vocabulary and things that you do, right? But with that said, there's a different level of free. You have to have a return on something regardless of the project. And a great case in point of that is, there are ways to barter for things, right? We've done projects, for example, for hardware companies, right? We've said, yeah, sure, we'll grade your promo for the hardware company. Give us a we'll do it at a cheaper rate. Give us a discount on your hardware or whatever. Or sometimes it's, in exchange for the work. Like, I'm fine with that. We got something of value out of the relationship. I see a lot of people, like when we were doing a lot of, you and I had, years past on a lot of tutorials, right? Like, hey, cool, I'll give you a discount grading this if you let me have the rights to use your footage in, lessons and tutorial. I'm getting something out of that, right? Same thing like you just did, over the past year or so, and we'll hopefully record this on a future episode. You just did a probably actually multiple years that I think about it, but a long project doing some film restoration stuff from some classic films from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and you weren't getting paid for it. But guess what? Like, you got something out of it in the sense that you were now have this whole new skill set, right?
Yeah.
That you were able to develop to film restoration. You developed new workflows, you developed new techniques, but best of all, it wasn't a timeline driven pressure thing. So even though it was free in the real sense, you were still getting something out of it that benefited you and benefited our company as an organization to do. And so
and intentionally doing something with the idea of, I'm going to use this for marketing for the company, I'm going to use this to expand into a different thing. That is different than I'm going to do this for exposure. I know that's a fine line.
It is,
right? But that is different. As long as you feel that you are getting something valuable out of your effort, I think it's okay to negotiate these kind of things within reason.
But the important thing is they actually have to have real value, right? Just perceived value, I don't think is important enough. I think that, like, if somebody is saying to you, like, oh, well, the case of the restoration thing that you did, right? That's a really tricky one, because I think for the average person, they look at that and be like, well, Joey, you just did it for free. But you went into it going, no, I'm going to do this for free. But the value here is that I now have built a whole separate skill set that I did not have on something that was real world, also very interesting, also very technically challenging. And I developed this whole tool set to now I've made the investment in that to where this can now pay dividends for years to come, marketing, our repertoire to do it. So, like, we actually had a lot of discussion about the validity of doing this project, right? Because I was very steadfast, like, no, we're not doing something for free. No, you're not getting paid. This is bullshit. We're being manipulated, all that kind of stuff. And you eventually convinced me, like, you defined and presented what the value was. And we looked at it very much in a pro cons list. And the person, the project and the person that was running the show, was respectful of that that value. Like, I don't have money to give you. I'm not just saying this for exposure. They offered multiple times, is there something I can do for you to help this? And our big answer was, yeah, well, you just have to accept that you're not a regular client. That you have to accept that we're not doing things on a schedule. You have to accept that we're doing this when we can. You have to accept that if there's a problem with something, I'm not going to jump on it 5 minutes after you write the email and make a fix, right? And so, like, there's flexibility in that's needed too. But in general, start with never work for free, and then levels down from that. Okay, free can be okay, but have real value for the things that you're doing.
And this one thing that we're talking about in specific is probably the only time that we've done anything like this, and will be the only time.
And it was a real, like, I'm not joking. We debated this probably over hours of Zoom phone calls and Slack, etc., like whether this is something that we should do. And like at certain points, Joey was like disappointed in me because I was like being such a hard ass about it. And other times I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like,
But
so
that's
like,
good. When you talk about setting rates and figuring these things out, you got to look at it from both of those perspectives,
Yeah.
right? Because if you always look at it from, I want to be nice to everyone and I want to give discounts and I'm scared to ask for more money, you're never going to get anywhere. And it's good to have someone to be the bad guy. Even if it's just you and you need to be your own bad guy sometimes,
Yeah.
when you're dealing with these issues of rates and hours and schedules and all of those things put together, you've got to think the good guy and the bad guy. You got to have the angel and the devil together to figure out what the right balance for you and for the project is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another thing that comes to mind about fighting this race to the bottom is the idea of kind of being just updating your presentation in terms of rates and that kind of stuff. And what I mean by that is we had a client that I think I've worked with since 2000, 2001, something like that. And, I eventually got them to a rate that was okay. Clearly a very, friendly grandfather kind of thing, right? And I looked at it the other day, and we end up doing probably 1 to 2 seasons of this show. It's 10 episode seasons per year, right? And I looked at this and I was like, I have not updated this rate in like 3 or 4 years with them, right? And it's getting to the point where like I'm resenting the rate and I'm resenting the shows, and that's a problem. So like, we talked about finding your rate and sticking to it. Part of that also is being a reality of what the current market economy, et cetera, is doing. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, hey, inflation's high, everything costs more money these days, costs are going up. Like, it costs me more money now to buy a piece of gear than it did 5 years ago. It costs me more money to do marketing and other stuff than it did 5 years ago, right? So things should flex, in lockstep with that. I mean, if we had regular jobs, Joey, we would talk about, like, with our employers, we talk about like COLA adjustments, cost of living adjustment, that 3 or 4% every year, your salary goes up. Well, it's the same thing, and same thing in terms of rates. Like, it's fine to have a rate and stick to it, but sticking to that rate with never changing it as the situation on the ground changes either is equally dangerous. I tend to look at January 1st as kind of like, hey, new calendar year, hey, our rates are going up, which begs the question, do you have a discussion with clients about this, or do you just do it, right? Now, I've made Joey really nervous in the past by just doing it, right? And going, oh, they're going to hate us. They're never going to work with us again. Like, if they come back and they say, well, it was X last year, now you're charging Y. Why is that? Hey, everything goes up. It's not, I'm not, and I'm not talking about increasing things 100%, right? If you're at $300 an hour going to 315 or 325, like figuring out an increase, but like that, the reality is that everything does cost more than it did a few years ago, and you have to flex your business. If you stay at that rate for perpetuity, you're contributing to the race to the bottom, because everything is getting more expensive. If you're not kind of matching pace, you're going to be losing money as well.
Yeah, where that bottom is shifting.
Now, what I'm about to say, I'm hesitant to say out loud because I sometimes think about this in my head, and it sounds like I'm a little bit of a snob, like I'm a elitist. I have believe in class systems or whatever, right? I think there is an inkling by small companies, freelancers for sure, right? Is that like, if times are tight, you're just gonna go after the thing that presents itself, right? So, if you haven't worked in 2 weeks, right, and somebody comes by and says, well, I got $100 for this job, you're gonna go take the job for $100 because it's been 2 weeks since you've had any work. Think before you do that, right? Chasing that thing just because it's the shiny object in front of you can have long and far-reaching ramifications to your perceived value, right? And what I mean is that if you do that $100 job for somebody today, you have literally no ability at a later point in time to come back to them for a similar frame job and go, well, guess what? It's now $1,000 to do that job. So I know this is hard for a lot of people to stomach and hear. And again, it sounds like I'm being a little elitist, but sometimes no is in fact the most powerful language that you have as a business operator and as a freelancer or whatever. Not committing to things that are below you, air quotes here, right? Because the second that you do, you're going to be painted in that. And I have never, ever experienced a situation where I've done something for cheap and then been able to work it back up to an acceptable rate, right? It's always been a fight to do so. It's always tended to sour the client on that, etc. The fact is, you can always go down if you need to, which we're not suggesting, but you can do that. It's next to impossible to go the other way if you started already at a lower rate, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about things like accuracy of bids, accuracy of stuff like that, I mean, every single time, like, to me, I'm doing it wrong if somebody comes back and goes, "Oh yeah, that's great. I'm totally on that," right? Like, I feel like I'm in the right space when somebody comes, "Oh, okay, it's 20 grand. It's a little more than we thought it was." And now that empowers me to be like, okay, my real number on this is 14 grand. I put 20 on the proposal because I have that wiggle room. They don't have to know that, but I can play within that range, right? Versus I start at 10 thinking the show is really worth 14 and I put it at 10 just to get it. That's dangerous.
Yeah. You'll never get that money back.
You're never going to get it, and you're going to set the precedent that it's never going to get there back as well. So
The danger there too is also, just take us to its crazy conclusion is if you take on every cheap job just to get the jobs in, when a job comes that will pay full rate and will be a full quality, good job that could lead on to more, bigger, better things, you've already got other obligations that you're going to resent.
yeah, and I think it's funny. It's like I think about this in my head sometimes too, as like, because I like to play golf, right? I'm pretty good at golf most of the time, but I'm not a professional, PGA Tour level golfer, right? And I think about it. I think about it in this kind of context. It was like, am I competition to the PGA Tour golfer? Of course not. I'm not competition to that because I'm so below their skill level and experience that like it would be fun to play with them, sure, but they're never, they're never going to look at me as competition to their game. And I tend to think that there's a feeling that a lot of people have in our industry that everybody is competition, and that's really not true, right? That like I am not competing with I don't want to compete with the guy charging $25 an hour working out of his bedroom. That's not who I want to compete with at all. At the same time, I know that I can't compete with a company doing, Netflix gold level stuff because we're just not that facility, right? So knowing your lane too, I think, is an important part about this, and realizing that not everybody is competition, and you don't, in other words, you don't actually have to compete in the race to the bottom if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, this has been a fun one. Hopefully, got people thinking a little bit about how, to kind of fight this race. And it's a real thing. And I'm not saying that, we're not guilty of it. Sometimes everybody is a little guilty of it sometimes, but kind of being aware of the race to the bottom, I think is the first step to kind of, to battle it. So, if you are checking out the show on YouTube, feel free to add into the comments. Those are always fun to take a look at, to respond to as well. You can follow us on YouTube, like and subscribe to the show. Every little like and subscribe helps. If you're listening to the audio version of this, the show is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google, Amazon, everywhere else where you find podcasts. You can, of course, always go to offsetpodcast.com. That is the homepage for the show, actually, and where we have additional show notes. You can also submit ideas and things of that nature with a little button at the top of that page if you have some ideas for some shows or things that you want to talk about. Huge thanks, as always, to our sponsor, Flanders Scientific. Without you guys, we couldn't do the show. Big thanks to Stella, our editor, who makes us sound like we know what we're talking about from time to time. And to you guys, our viewers and our listeners, really, really appreciate you. If you like the show, feel free to tell a colleague, a friend. Every little like and subscribe helps. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, all that fun stuff as well. So, for the Offset Podcast, I'm Robbie Cronin.
And I'm Joey Deanna. Thanks for watching.